Good morning. Welcome to the Long Live Alternative Parties podcast. Free Press Media Press Inc., an alternative parties books publisher, sponsors this podcast. I'm Andrew Bouchard. Welcome to the Long Live Alternative Parties podcast. Today we have another exciting guest, like we always have on this podcast. His name is Harold, and his last name is hard to pronounce, so I'm going to have him pronounce it for us. So
Kyriazi.
Welcome to the podcast, Harold.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. It's a Greek name. I say Kyriazi. It's close to the Greek pronunciation.
Okay, so Kyriazi?
Kyriazi. In Greek, it's Kyriazi, but I say Kyriazi.
Okay. So, Harold, kindly introduce yourself to our audience. Kindly tell us who you are, what organization you represent, and give a brief background of your life.
Boy, that's a mouthful. So, I'm professionally, or I'm retired now, but I was a scientist, a biological researcher for many years.
Okay.
I have a doctoral degree in biochemistry, undergraduate degree in chemistry, and then I switched fields to brain research and did that for 26 years. So I worked for a professor in the neurobiology department at the University of Pittsburgh and was a research associate. But my interests range widely, and in the early 1990s, I got involved with Libertarian Party politics.
Okay.
And I got into that through Ayn Rand, I guess. I got involved with an objectivist group at Carnegie Mellon University, which is here in Pittsburgh, where I'm located. And, I went to a lecture by some guy that came from the Foundation for Economic Education many years ago and heard about Ron Paul. He was going to be visiting Pittsburgh, I guess it was 1988, as part of his presidential campaign then. And he was the Libertarian Party candidate, so I went to Ron Paul's talk, and then slowly in the 90s, we began forming a Libertarian group here in Pittsburgh, and I was the secretary of that for many years. I edited and published a newsletter of local libertarian happenings and philosophical articles, whatnot, here in Pittsburgh for many years. Ran for office several times, city council, I think in 1995, and then for state senate. Right now, I've decided that the Libertarian Party is really not going to be able to be successful until we change our voting systems to something like approval voting, or instant runoff voting, where people who want to vote for libertarians now do not because they're afraid the greater of two evils will be elected.
Sure.
And depending upon your issues, that could be either a Republican or a Democrat. So I've resigned from the board. I was on the board of directors of our local LP for many years, but I've had to take care of my elderly father the last few years, and so that's kind of my full-time job now.
Okay. So
does that give you a good idea of
yes.
what you wanted?
Yes.
All right.
So was it resigning out of frustration with the party, or is it more because of the family issues?
It was more because of the family issues, but also because there's a lot of young blood and interest that came into our local Pittsburgh Libertarian Party, and they're handling things fine on their own. I was able to be there as a board member for several years just to offer, my experience, but I think they don't need it anymore, and so my activity has lately been restricted to writing an occasional newspaper column or letter to the editor on the subject, posting things on social media when I see an opportunity.
Okay.
But
so what types of editorials are you writing these days then?
So during the George Floyd riots, or protests as you view them, back in the summer of 2020, I wrote a column for the Pittsburgh Tribune Review. It's one of the two local newspapers. It's a daily. And I think it was titled The Dirty Root of Systemic Racism. And I tried to point out that our system of land ownership is probably an unseen but very powerful force for inhibiting wealth creation among black families. So that's what that focused on. I forget what month that was, but either the late spring or summer of 2020.
So how do you view that through the lens of libertarianism? So wouldn't a libertarian want there to be free and open exchange of land and no restrictions, that people could, if they're a private company, they can restrict it however they want to? Or how would that work through the lens of libertarianism?
That's a good question, and that's kind of why I wrote my book, which you had asked me about when you first approached me. It was called Libertarian Party at Sea on Land. And the problem is that most libertarians, I consider them right libertarians rather than left libertarians.
Okay.
And that they have this Rothbardian, or Murray Rothbard type view of land ownership, which is that the first user of land is the rightful owner for all time, whether you're using it or not. No matter how much how much of your own labor you had to add to that land. And this is the view that Ayn Rand held too, although she was kind of inconsistent with it. But the classical liberal view, held by guys like Adam Smith, Thomas Paine, Thomas Jefferson, I guess Herbert Spencer, and then Henry George. Many don't even know his name, but he was quite a force for change in the latter half of the 19th century with his book Progress in Poverty, published in 1879. That view has always been that land is properly considered common property, and that all people have equal rights to land, and that what an individual can own is only the improvements made to that land, so that there should be a collection of ground rent from all landowners, which should then be distributed equally to all citizens as their birthright. I don't know if that was clear, but we could go into it a little bit more if you.
Yes, that's intriguing. So how does that affect the Native Americans and when they were on the lands and we came over here? Because a lot of people are critical of the way that was handled, and they would say that we stole the land from the Native Americans. Do you believe we did steal the land, or how does that work through this viewpoint?
Well, so Native Americans, I think, were mostly hunters and gatherers, and so they had a view of land that most people throughout history have had before agriculture came, and that was that the person using it is the one who owns it, and then the next season or whatever, then it's up for grabs. So I don't think the Native Americans really understood what they were doing when they sold Manhattan for whatever it was, beads, and then of course it was conquest and pestilence that wiped out a lot of the Native Americans, and I can't blame land policy for that, but I view if we were able to institute land value taxation so that the full value of the full uncreated value, nature-created value of land were shared equally, then Native Americans would once again own land the same way they did before, so that it would be a way of restoring justice in that sense. Now, Rothbardians, they're most right-wing libertarians, they would look at the current situation, and they should, if they were consistent, say, well, yeah, we need to give our land back to the Native Americans. But none of them are doing that. Maybe they think it's impractical, or they just don't want to think about it. But
is it too late in the game where what I found in the real world, unfortunately, it's very difficult to make social justice happen where injustice in the past occurred, where it's very hard to rectify them without uprooting everything that was already created. Is that part of the deal? Is that why they don't want to do anything about it?
Well, I mean, that touches on the issue of reparations for slavery, certainly. So I guess the problem would be finding the people that were wronged years ago and maybe then somehow compensating their heirs.
Yeah, that's usually how it goes.
That's kind of hard, but I think most people would be satisfied if we could just set up a fair system today, share the Earth's value among all people, and then there would be a lot less inequality. It would answer the progressive socialist call for equity. Certainly, we're never going to have pure equity where everybody's got exactly the same thing because of natural endowments that are different and abilities that are different, parents that are different. But we'll get as close as we can, and there will be a lot less injustice by certain landlords using their legal privilege to kind of steal the labor or the fruits of labor of other workers. So right now most libertarians, they think that the government is wrong to tax their, tax sales, tax income. They think that's wrong because they feel that they own the fruits of their labor and only they should say what happens to those fruits. And I agree with them, but they don't understand that by not sharing the land value, the natural value of the land equally, we're inhibiting wealth creation by allowing some people to own land and sit on it, speculate on land, and then try to influence government to do projects that use taxpayers' money to put money in their pockets by increasing the value of their land, for example. So there's a lot of injustice in the system that neither the right nor the left really understands the root of. I think if we could just educate people about this issue, it's something that we could all come together on, and there would be, no way to stop that kind of a movement once left and right are united.
Sure.
We all have a lot of the same heroes, intellectual heroes, but we've kind of forgotten their views on the land question.
So how do you feel about rent? Do you think rent is an oppressive institution, or is it acceptable?
Did you say rent is an effective institution?
No, is rent an oppressive institution? Some people want to cancel rent. They see landlords as parasites. Or they see. So do you agree with that view, or how do you view rent?
So if we're talking about people renting apartments,
yes,
I think it's perfectly legitimate because landlords have to maintain the apartments. Somebody had to build the apartment, build the house, and so those people should be compensated. Certainly the landlord probably paid the previous people, a certain amount. So if we were able to distinguish the value of the land versus the value of the building, and we are able to do that scientifically, if you're a decent assessor, then, well, let me just back up. I'm going to say, first of all, if we had land value taxation, there would be a lot more apartments built because a lot more land would come onto the market. People would be able to build their own houses if they wanted. With the land would be so cheap, the rent would be so cheap. So there would be a lot less cause for dissatisfaction with landlords. And in that case, with land value tax being collected, your landlord would be only able to collect the rent that was equal to a fair compensation for his labor. So the rents would come down. Well, I should say the rents come down because of the greater competition owing to the collection of ground rents, which then opens up more land for development, because no one's going to be hoarding land that's costing them money that they can't make money from.
What about from the? I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was going to say, is that clear, or should we move on?
I think that's clear.
Okay.
It leads me to think about, because you were mentioning land being sit on and not used. Some people would say that's a good thing because they want to prevent sprawl and they want to prevent all the land from being occupied. So how would that work?
Well, so I've heard that criticism, and under a land value tax system, land would be put to its highest and best use, but people that have been pushed out into the far suburbs, into the far reaches, they're doing that mainly because land in the city is speculated upon, and it's a lot more expensive, and there just aren't, affordable options in the city or closer to town. So under land value taxation, all of that sprawl would come back toward a more central location where living is more efficient, where you could get by without a car, where you'd be able to use public transportation, where you could walk to work, walk to the grocery, to the doctor and dentist.
Sure.
So, and then once we get used to having this kind of a regime, governments would be creating parks and parklets that increase the value of land, and that would make the place more livable. It would attract more people into their jurisdiction and increase the land rents that they collect. And that you might even offer incentives to governments for governing wisely and creating lots of land value. So,
what about things like national parks? How would this cause those to go away and people would want to use the land for rent, or how would that work?
I don't see any problem with the federal government setting aside land for national parks.
Okay.
But I don't like the way we have a federal government controlled these days. I would, if we had a much more decentralized government where people had control at a local level, and then our local officials would kind of appoint, like, our state officials, and then this, you probably are aware, but most people aren't aware, that the U.S. Senate used to be appointed positions appointed by the state legislatures from their house, from the state house. And I like that because it was a way of, taking the smart people who elected smarter people to then appoint what they consider smart, wise people to the highest positions, rather than letting people, the ordinary voter, make a decision on who's going to be the Senate based upon, the way they look or some slick political ads. I think it's just not it's not a good way to govern. I think the founding fathers had it right, and I think we screwed up whenever we went to popular election of senators. So if we had a proper kind of federal government, I think I would trust their decisions much more so.
Okay.
But, I think if we had land value taxation instituted locally throughout most of the country, there's not going to be any need for people to go in and develop national park land, other than, maybe for oil drilling and that sort of thing, and that can be done safely, hopefully, or not done at all.
Interesting.
Yeah, I'm sorry to leave so many things unresolved, but it's complicated.
Yeah, it sounds like it. It's interesting. So your book, kindly tell our audience whatever you feel comfortable sharing. You might not want to reveal everything so that people still want to read it, but kindly tell us about your book, whatever you're comfortable sharing.
Okay, well, I wrote it 23 years ago, so my ability to tell people what's in it is limited at this point. My memory is not the greatest asset of my brain. I think I'm good at analyzing things, but not so much good at remembering all the details. But it's only 122 pages. It's called Libertarian Party at Sea on Land, and the idea is, well, my cover illustration is of the Statue of Liberty floating freely in the ocean, having been knocked off its classical liberal base, and she's got a lifesaver around her saying USS Libertarian. This was the brainchild of a guy that was a colleague of mine, Brad Minery. He was a fellow brain researcher and also a talented cartoonist. Anyway, she's looking at a compass, trying to decide which way to go, and it's anyway. So the book, what I did was compile a lot of statements from classical liberals and modern people throughout history, even going back to the Bible. About their views on the land question, how to manage the land. I started off by telling in a preface how I got into the question here in Pittsburgh, how the issue motivated other people to run for office who probably wouldn't have run for office, because armed with these ideas, they were able to offer something to not only libertarians and the people on the right who favor being able to use the fruits of your labor as you want, but also to people on the left who think that we've got an unfair system, although they didn't really understand why the system was unfair, but they can clearly see that the results are very skewed and probably unfair. Then I give a few basic principles, and over the, first 12 or 14 pages show how principles of the right to life, the equal rights for all, things like that are able to, or they have corollary rights, which are basically the right to the use of land and right to the fruits of your labor in land. And then I give a bunch of historical treatments, quotes, and then I give arguments for and against land value taxation, and I end with prescriptions for how we can try to move this large country. It's like trying to move the Titanic away from an iceberg. Lately, I've actually felt that a lot of the division we have in our country between left and right, where people think the other side is evil, it could all have been avoided if people understood the land question and this issue. But we just haven't been successful in, getting the word out, and despite over 100 years of effort by people. So I appreciate what you're doing for the cause. We all do a little bit in our own way.
Thank you, sir.
That's pretty much what the book is about.
So did you publish this book when you were the board member of the Libertarian Party of Pennsylvania?
I'm not even sure I was. I was think I might have been the Western Vice Chair at one point, but usually I was just a Allegheny County. Yeah, that's the county that Pittsburgh is located in. I was on the board there, and I don't think I ever, I was never I might have been a vice chair at one point, but no, I don't. I was certainly active in the Libertarian Party in 1999 and publishing the newsletter then. So, yeah, I was active, but I don't think I was active with the state party so much.
Okay. So did the party that you're active with, did they react to your book at all? How did they respond?
Some liked it, and some didn't. And I've had conversations with some, otherwise bright libertarians. I don't know, are you familiar with Jacob Hornberger? He's the head of a group called the Future of Freedom Foundation. He tried to win the presidential nomination for the Libertarian Party this last go-around. But I've had conversations with him via email, and, his attitude is, I don't like any kind of taxation, and he thinks land value tax is a tax, although I tried to argue that it's really just a user fee, and he thought, well, that's just obfuscation, or he thought it continued to be a tax. Anyway, some liked it, some didn't. Dan Sullivan, I don't know if you've encountered him before, but he's the one who got me into the issue. He's a big leader in the land value tax movement. There's something called the Council of Georgist Organizations. I think he's been a leader of the Henry George School and also the Robert Schalkenbach Foundation, who publishes the works of Henry George and who published my book, actually.
Okay.
He gave talks to the Libertarian Party. He might be a better one to talk to about their reaction. But I haven't been to a state convention in probably 10 years or more.
Oh, okay.
I've actually been focused on some theoretical physics over the last 16 years, so I try to do what others aren't able to do, and try to focus on things that I'll have the biggest impact on.
So would you like to give a brief overview of who Henry George was?
I can try. I think he was born in Philadelphia in 1838. I think he went on a voyage. I ended up living in San Francisco during the gold rush. He wondered, well, he looked at this gold rush and he thought it was kind of silly that people were digging up this substance from the ground and then burying it in another place called Fort Knox. He began thinking about economic questions. Actually, I'm not even sure about that, but he saw the great disparity of poverty and wealth in San Francisco, and tried to figure out why that was. He was not trained as an economist. He wasn't a professional economist. But he did write that book, Progress in Poverty, in 1879 and published it. It was his magnum opus. He had written a short pamphlet before then. I think the motivation was that most people in the 1800s, they looked at the development of steam engines and steam power and the Industrial Revolution, and they figured that, wow, this is really multiplying people's ability to create wealth, and they figured that, wow, pretty soon everybody's going to be wealthy and well off, and we're not going to have the same levels of poverty that we did. But that was not at all the case. So that was the motivation for his book, Progress and Poverty. And his argument was that once the United States had most of its land claimed, then that cut off people from the land, and they had to work for whatever wages businesses were able or were willing to pay, and so they were driven down to kind of the base minimum level of income. It's called starvation wages, or it's just above starvation. I mean, if people are actually starving and dying, then they're not good workers. But if you're paying them just a little bit above that, then the landowners are getting the most rent. The entrepreneurs who are using the land are getting the most profit that they can, but the workers are getting driven into the ground. And so that was the thrust of his conclusion, and he backed it up with a detailed analysis of Malthusianism, like Malthus, who had thought that mankind would inevitably procreate to the point where people were starving, and he answered that criticism. I guess the answer is that people, once they get to have a certain level of wealth, they stop having so many children, because children are no longer their guarantees. In old age, they'll have enough wealth stored up that they can, live a comfortable life and not have to depend on their children. I'm not the best person to ask that question of. There are many others in the Georgist movement who are much more thoroughly familiar with Henry George.
That's okay. That's a good overview. That gives us a good background.
Okay. Well, I'm glad you're satisfied.
So how can our audience get a hold of your book? Where's the place that you get the most royalties if they go to?
I don't really get any royalties. I think I've donated everything to the Robert Schalkenbach Foundation. I think it's available both in hardback, or not hardback, but soft cover. It was originally published in soft cover. There are no hard copy versions or hardback versions. And I think it's also available as a ebook.
Okay.
And I think it's probably available for like $5 a copy on the Robert Schalkenbach Foundation website. And I used to sell copies on Amazon, but I don't know. It's been a few years since I've sold a copy, so I'm not sure whether that's even still considered available.
Okay. Okay, that sounds good.
So, Andrew, I noticed from your Facebook page that your main interest was the First Amendment. So I'm wondering how you got interested or turned on to land value taxation or earth sharing.
The way I got there was I was looking for speakers that were affiliated with the Libertarian Party, and then I came across your book.
Ah, all right. Cool.
Yeah.
Well,
yep, so that's what led me to you.
Well, there are many geo-libertarians out there, and I think they're among the best people, intellectually and heart-wise, that you'll find. So
excellent. It's a new side of libertarianism. Let's see.
All righty, yeah, and I'd recommend Dan Sullivan to you. He's a much better speaker. He's got a great memory for details, and he's just a natural-born speaker. He's got the gift of gab. He's Irish.
Okay. Sounds great.
So I'd be happy to put you in touch with him at some point.
Yeah. Dan Sullivan is a fairly common name, so I'm afraid if I search for him, I'm going to come up with a lot of people. So if you want to give me contact information, I appreciate that.
Sure. Should we do that now or privately?
We probably do it privately. I don't know if the listeners would be interested in that, but that would be great if you could do it privately.
Okay. Sounds
All
good.
right. Well, thank you for coming on the podcast today. We appreciate you sharing this different point of view.
Well, I appreciate your interest. Thank you.
All right. Well, take care, and we wish you all the best with your book and all your personal endeavors and professional endeavors.
Same to you, Andrew. Thank you.
Bye now.
Okay. Bye-bye.